Louis Bryant's gaze locks onto Wren's eyes, and her reptilian scales erupt in a kaleidoscope of colors. The Zarantine female shudders visibly, her breath quickening as she struggles to maintain composure. Louis, unaware of the effect he's having, furrows his brow in concern. The opulent reception hall of the Zarantine High Council falls silent. Zarantine males bristle, their spines flaring in agitation. Security forces edge closer, hands hovering near their weapons. Louis, the newly appointed human ambassador to the Zarantine homeworld, takes a step towards Wren. "Are you all right?" he asks, his voice carrying across the suddenly tense room. Wren's scales shift again, deepening to a rich crimson. She opens her mouth to speak, but no words come out. Other Zarantine females in the vicinity begin to exhibit similar signs of distress. Or is it arousal? A low growl emanates from a cluster of Zarantine males. "Remove the human," one of them demands, his voice thick with barely contained anger. Louis raises his hands in a placating gesture. "I don't understand. What's happening?" The Zarantine High Council members convene hurriedly, their hushed voices carrying undertones of alarm and confusion. Security forces form a tight circle around Louis, cutting him off from the rest of the attendees. "Ambassador Bryant," a stern voice booms from the dais, "you will leave this planet immediately. Your presence here is destabilizing and threatens the very fabric of our society." Louis's mind races. How could simple eye contact cause such chaos? He scans the room, noting the mix of hostility and fascination on the faces of the Zarantine. His gaze inadvertently meets that of another female, who immediately begins to tremble. "Wait!" A new voice cuts through the commotion. A group of Zarantine in white coats pushes through the crowd. "We cannot let this opportunity pass. This human's ability could unlock new aspects of our biology." The lead scientist, her scales a shimmering blue, addresses the council. "High Councilors, I implore you to reconsider. This phenomenon must be studied. The implications for interspecies relations are profound." Murmurs of agreement and protest ripple through the gathering. Louis stands frozen, acutely aware that his every movement is being scrutinized. He catches sight of Wren, who's being comforted by her colleagues, but can't seem to tear her eyes away from him. After what feels like an eternity, the head counselor speaks. "Ambassador Bryant will remain, but under strict observation. He will be confined to a research facility until we understand the extent of his influence." Louis swallows hard, realizing the gravity of his situation. As security begins to escort him out, he notices Wren stepping forward. "I volunteer to serve as the human's liaison," she announces, her voice quavering slightly. The head counselor nods curtly. "Granted, but be warned, this is a matter of utmost sensitivity. The stability of our world may depend on what we learn." As Louis is led away, his mind reels with the implications. He's become a scientific curiosity, a diplomatic incident, and a potential evolutionary catalyst, all because of an accidental discovery. The weight of responsibility settles on his shoulders. He must find a way to turn this into an advantage for humanity without exploiting the power he seems to hold over the Zarantine females. The doors of the reception hall close behind him, marking the end of his brief tenure as a conventional ambassador and the beginning of an unprecedented diplomatic and scientific adventure. Louis takes a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenges ahead. The fate of human Zarantine relations now rests in his hands and his eyes. The doors of the reception hall close behind Louis, marking the end of his brief tenure as a conventional ambassador and the beginning of an unprecedented diplomatic and scientific adventure. As he was escorted through the winding corridors of the Zarantine facility, Louis's mind raced with questions and concerns about what lay ahead. Days passed in a blur of medical examinations and preliminary tests. Louis found himself in a sterile, white-walled laboratory, surrounded by an array of unfamiliar equipment. The air hummed with the soft whir of machines and the occasional beep of monitoring devices. A tall, slender Zarantine female with iridescent blue scales approached him. "Ambassador Bryant, I am Dr. Zira, lead researcher for this project," she introduced herself, her voice calm and professional. "We are about to begin a series of controlled exposure sessions to understand your effect on Zarantine females." Louis nodded, his throat dry. I'll do my best to cooperate, Dr. Zira. But I have to admit, I'm still in the dark about what's happening here. Dr. Zira's scales rippled, a sign Lewis had come to recognize as mild amusement. That makes two of us, Ambassador. We're in uncharted territory here. The experiments began in earnest. Louis found himself seated across from various Zarantine female volunteers, instructed to make direct eye contact for varying durations. The results were consistently dramatic. With each session, Lewis witnessed the now familiar signs: rapid color changes in scales, accelerated breathing, and unmistakable signs of physiological arousal. During one such experiment, alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. Red lights flashed, and the calm atmosphere of scientific inquiry shattered. "Security breach," a voice boomed over the intercom. "All personnel, initiate lockdown procedures immediately." Chaos erupted in the lab. Researchers scrambled to secure equipment and data. Security forces streamed into the room, their weapons drawn. In the confusion, Lewis felt a hand grab his arm. It was Wren, her scales a mottled pattern of alarm and concern. "This way, Ambassador," she hissed, pulling him towards a side door. "We need to get you to a secure location." They rushed through the corridor, the sounds of struggle echoing behind them. Suddenly, a group of male Zarantines rounded the corner ahead, their eyes filled with hatred. "There's the human!" one of them snarled. "Get him!" Wren reacted instantly, shoving Lewis into a nearby room and slamming her hand on the control panel. The door hissed shut just as their pursuers reached it. Lewis heard the thud of bodies against the metal and angry shouts from the other side. "Lockdown protocol activated," an automated voice announced. "This area is now sealed until the all-clear is given." Lewis turned to survey their surroundings. They were in a small laboratory, filled with delicate-looking equipment and glowing screens. Wren stood with her back against the door, her chest heaving. "Are you all right?" Louis asked, taking a step towards her. Wren's scales erupted in a riot of colors, and she pressed herself harder against the door. "Please," she gasped, "stay back. I don't know how long I can—" Louis quickly averted his eyes, realizing the effect his gaze was having on her. "I'm sorry," he said, turning to face the far wall. "I didn't mean to. Is there anything I can do?" Wren took several deep breaths. "It's not your fault, Ambassador. We need to find a way out of here. The longer we're in close proximity, the more intense the effect becomes." They began searching the lab for alternative exits or communication devices, all while trying to maintain as much distance as possible in the confined space. Despite their efforts, Louis could sense Wren's growing discomfort and agitation. Hours ticked by with no sign of rescue. The tension in the room grew thick, punctuated only by the occasional beep of lab equipment and their increasingly labored breathing. "Wren," Lewis finally broke the silence. "Maybe we should talk. It might help take our minds off this situation." Wren nodded, her scales shifting to a deep purple. "What would you like to talk about, Ambassador?" They began to converse, hesitantly at first, then with growing ease. Lewis shared stories of Earth, describing the vast oceans and towering mountains of his homeworld. Wren, in turn, spoke of Zarantine culture, their complex social hierarchies, and the recent strides they'd made in space exploration. As they talked, Lewis found himself captivated by Wren's intelligence and the graceful way her scales shifted with each emotion. He caught himself staring more than once, quickly looking away when he realized what he was doing. For her part, Wren seemed to be struggling more and more to maintain her composure. Her voice would occasionally quaver, and her scales were in a constant state of flux, cycling through a mesmerizing array of colors. "Ambassador," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't think I can... I've never felt..." Lewis felt his heart rate quicken. The air between them seemed to crackle with energy. He took a step closer, drawn by an impulse he couldn't explain. Just then, the lab door slid open with a hiss. Dr. Zira stood in the doorway, flanked by security personnel. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene before her. "Ambassador Bryant, Liaison Wren," she said sharply, "step away from each other immediately. The situation has been contained, but we need to run full examinations on both of you right away." As Lewis was led away by security, he caught one last glimpse of Wren. Her scales had taken on a brilliant, iridescent sheen he'd never seen before. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and in that instant, Louis knew that everything had changed. The implications of what had transpired in that lab would ripple far beyond its walls, affecting not just their lives, but potentially the future of human-Zarantine relations and Zarantine society itself. The following days saw a flurry of activity at the Zarantine Research Facility. Dr. Zira, driven by scientific curiosity and the unprecedented nature of their discovery, proposed a new series of experiments to the High Council. Her goal, to explore the potential evolutionary impact of human-Zarantine contact. "We must proceed with utmost caution," the head counselor warned, his scales a muted gray of concern. "The stability of our society hangs in the balance." With reluctant approval from the council, the facility implemented stricter protocols. Louis found himself under constant surveillance, his movements restricted to carefully controlled environments. The weight of his unintentional influence pressed heavily upon him as he was led from one sterile room to another. On the third day of the new regimen, Louis entered a spacious laboratory filled with an array of Zarantine females. Their scales shimmered with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. Dr. Zira stood at the center, her demeanor professional, but her eyes alight with scientific fervor. "Ambassador Bryant," she began, "allow me to introduce you to our volunteers. They represent a diverse cross-section of Zarantine genetic profiles." As Louis' gaze swept across the room, he noticed a young Zarantine female standing slightly apart from the others. Her posture radiated defiance, her scales a deep, steady blue that contrasted sharply with the shifting colors of her peers. "This is Kira," Dr. Zira explained, following Louis' line of sight. "She's one of our most promising young scientists." Kira met Louis' eyes without flinching, her scales maintaining their steady hue. Louis felt a spark of intrigue at her apparent resistance to his effect. The experiments began in earnest. Louis engaged in a series of structured activities with each volunteer, always under the watchful eyes of Dr. Zira and her team. As the days wore on, patterns emerged. Most Zarantine females exhibited the now familiar signs of arousal and physiological change upon prolonged eye contact with Louis. But Kira remained an enigma. During their first session together, she maintained her composure far longer than the others. Yet as the minutes ticked by, Louis noticed subtle shifts in her demeanor. Her breathing quickened almost imperceptibly, and her scales began to ripple with hints of iridescence. "Fascinating," Dr. Zira murmured, furiously taking notes. "The change is gradual, but undeniable." As their session came to an end, Kira's eyes locked with Louis's. For a brief moment, he saw a flicker of something, curiosity, defiance, or perhaps desire, before she quickly looked away. Later that evening, as Louis sat alone in his quarters, he noticed a small piece of paper tucked into the folds of his dinner tray. Glancing around to ensure he wasn't being watched, he unfolded it carefully. In an elegant alien script, it read, "Not all is as it seems. We have much to discuss. K." Louis' heart raced. He quickly destroyed the note, his mind buzzing with questions and possibilities. As he lay in bed that night, sleep eluded him. The image of Kira's steady gaze and the weight of her cryptic message filled his thoughts. The next morning, Louis entered the lab with renewed purpose. As he and Kira engaged in their assigned tasks, he felt a new undercurrent of tension between them. Their hands brushed as they reached for the same object, sending a jolt of electricity through Louis's body. Kira's scales flickered momentarily, a kaleidoscope of colors rippling across her skin before settling back to their usual blue. She met his eyes, and Louis saw the same struggle he felt reflected in her gaze. Throughout the day, they exchanged furtive glances and subtle gestures. Louis discovered a small data chip hidden in his lunch, containing a message from Kira detailing her theories about the experiments and her growing suspicions about the military's interest in their findings. As the weeks passed, their clandestine communication became more frequent and daring. They developed a system of signals and hiding spots, exchanging notes and fleeting touches whenever they could evade the watchful eyes of the researchers. But their secret exchanges didn't go entirely unnoticed. Ren, still recovering from her extended exposure to Louis, observed their interactions with a mix of curiosity and concern. Her own transformation had not gone unnoticed by the Zarantine military, particularly General Thrix, a hardline leader with a reputation for ruthlessness. The human's effect could revolutionize our defense capabilities, Thrix argued during a classified meeting with the High Council. We must prioritize its military applications. As tensions mounted between the scientific and military factions, Louis and Kira's attraction intensified. During a particularly grueling series of tests, they found themselves alone in a small observation room. The air crackled with unspoken desire. "Louis," Kira whispered, her scales shimmering with awe-inspiring emotion. "I don't know how much longer I can resist this." Louis stepped closer, drawn by an irresistible force. "Kira, Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the facility. Red lights flashed, and the room filled with the sound of running feet and shouted orders. "Security breach," a voice boomed over the intercom. "Unauthorized personnel have entered the facility. All subjects are to remain in their current locations until further notice." Louis and Kira exchanged a look of alarm. In the chaos that followed, they found themselves separated from the main group, lost in the maze-like corridors of the research center. "This way!" Kira hissed, grabbing Louis's hand. "I know a way out." Heart pounding, Louis followed her through a series of unmarked doors and hidden passages. As they emerged into the alien landscape of the Zarantine world, the enormity of their situation hit him. They were fugitives now, alone in a hostile environment, with unknown forces in pursuit. Kira's scales shimmered with a mix of fear and excitement as she turned to face Louis. "We need to move quickly. There's something I need to show you, something that could change everything we thought we knew about our species." With one last glance at the facility behind them, Louis nodded. Together they set off into the unknown, the first step in a journey that would challenge everything they believed about themselves, their peoples, and the very nature of their connection. Relationship, their peoples, and the very nature of their bond. As they ventured deeper into the alien wilderness, Louis and Kira stumbled upon a series of weathered stone structures. The ancient ruins rose from the landscape like the bones of a forgotten civilization, their surfaces etched with intricate symbols that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. "These ruins?" Kira whispered, her scales shimmering with excitement. "They're not in any of our historical records. How is this possible?" Louis ran his hand along a moss-covered pillar, feeling a faint vibration beneath his fingertips. "Maybe they were meant to be hidden," he mused. They pressed on, navigating through crumbling archways and overgrown courtyards. The air grew thick with an electric charge, raising the hair on Louis's arms and causing Kira's scales to ripple with increasing frequency. Suddenly, Kira froze. "Look," she breathed, pointing to a partially concealed entrance. They squeezed through the narrow opening, emerging into a vast chamber that took their breath away. The room was filled with an array of artifacts unlike anything they had ever seen. Crystalline structures pulsed with soft light, and metallic objects of indeterminate purpose floated inches above the ground. In the center of the chamber stood a towering device, its surface a mesmerizing blend of organic curves and precise geometric patterns. Louis approached it cautiously, drawn by an inexplicable pull. "It looks like some kind of communication array," Kira observed, her scientific curiosity overcoming her caution. As Louis reached out to examine the device more closely, his fingers brushed against a recessed panel. A surge of energy coursed through his body, and the device hummed to life. A blinding beam of light shot upward, piercing through the ceiling of the chamber and into the sky above. "Louis!" Kira cried out, her scales erupting in a dazzling display of colors. "What did you do?" Before he could respond, Kira doubled over, gasping. Her scales began to glow with an intensity that surpassed anything Louis had witnessed before. She straightened, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and exhilaration. "I feel different," she said, her voice trembling. "Everything is so clear, so vibrant. I can sense things I never could before." Louis rushed to her side, his heart pounding. "Are you all right? I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to activate it. Let me try to shut it down." He turned back to the device, frantically searching for a way to deactivate it. But no matter what he tried, the beam persisted, pulsing with an ever-increasing intensity. A distant rumble caught their attention. Through the hole in the ceiling, they could see ships approaching, both the sleek vessels of the Zarantine military and unfamiliar crafts of an unknown design. "We need to get out of here," Louis said urgently, taking Kira's hand. They raced back through the ruins, emerging just as a group of soldiers led by General Thrix touched down nearby. The general's scales darkened with fury as he spotted them. "Ambassador Bryant," he bellowed, "surrender yourself and the technology you've activated immediately." Louis stepped protectively in front of Kira, his mind racing for a way out of their predicament. But before he could formulate a plan, the air shimmered and a new spacecraft materialized between them and the general's forces. The ship's hull seemed to ripple like water, its surface adorned with patterns similar to those in the ruins. A hatch opened, and an elderly Zarantine emerged, her scales a soft, pearlescent white that spoke of great age and wisdom. "I am Elder Zix," she announced, her voice carrying despite its softness. "The signal we have long awaited has finally been sent. The time has come for truth to be revealed." General Thrix bristled, his scales flaring aggressively. "What is the meaning of this? Who are you to interfere with military operations?" Elder Zix turned her gaze to Louis and Kira, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sorrow. "Humans and Zarantines share a history far deeper than either of you know. Thousands of years ago, our peoples were part of a grand alliance that spanned the stars." A collective gasp rose from the gathered Zarantines. Dr. Zira, who had just arrived on the scene, pushed her way to the front, her scales pulsing with scientific excitement. "But how is that possible?" she demanded. "Our historical records show no such connection." "Because it was erased," Elder Zix explained. "A catastrophic event forced our peoples apart. To protect both species, the decision was made to separate and forget, but fail-safes were put in place. The effect of human eye contact on Zarantines is one such measure, designed to reawaken our dormant connection when the time was right." As Elder Zix spoke, Louis felt Kira press closer to him. The contact sent a surge of electricity through his body, and he could see Kira's scales shimmer in response. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. Without conscious thought, they moved towards each other. Their lips met in a passionate embrace, and a visible wave of energy radiated outward from their joined bodies. The pulse swept across the gathered crowd, temporarily stunning humans and Zarantines alike. Taking advantage of the momentary chaos, Elder Zix ushered Louis and Kira towards her ship. Dr. Zira, shaking off the effects of the energy wave, hurried after them. "I must continue my research," she insisted, boarding the ship behind them. As the hatch began to close, General Thrix recovered his senses. "Stop them!" he roared, raising his weapon. The air filled with the sound of energy weapons charging up. Elder Zix's ship hummed to life, its engines glowing with an otherworldly light. As the first shots were fired, the ship shot upward, nimbly evading the barrage. Louis gripped Kira's hand tightly as they watched their world shrink beneath them. The ship accelerated, breaking through the planet's atmosphere and into the star-studded blackness of space. "Where are we going?" Louis asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Elder Zix's eyes twinkled with a mix of mischief and purpose. "To a place where you can explore your connections safely, a hidden colony where the truth of our shared past has been preserved." As the ship streaked through space, Louis and Kira found themselves drawn to each other once more. The close confines of the ship and the intensity of recent events only served to heighten the attraction between them. However, they both knew that they couldn't give in to their desires just yet. There was too much at stake, too many questions left unanswered. Dr. Zira busied herself examining the ship's technology, her scales flickering with impossibly strong excitement. "The implications of this discovery are staggering," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "We must develop a plan to share this knowledge with both our peoples." Louis nodded, forcing himself to focus on the task at hand rather than the intoxicating presence of Kira beside him. "You're right," he agreed, "but we need to be careful. There will be those who resist this change, on both sides." As the hidden Zarantine colony came into view, a shimmering oasis of technology nestled on a distant moon, Louis, Kira, and Dr. Zira began to formulate their strategy. They knew that the revelations they carried had the power to reshape the future of both their species. And at the center of it all was the deepening bond between human and Zarantine, a connection that held both promise and peril for the galaxy at large. As the ship entered the moon's atmosphere, Louis felt a surge of anticipation. The hidden Zarantine colony came into view, a marvel of engineering nestled within the cratered landscape. Elder Zix guided the craft towards a concealed hangar, its doors sliding open to welcome them. "We've arrived," Elder Zix announced, her scales shimmering with a mix of relief and excitement. The ship touched down smoothly, and as the hatch opened, Louis was struck by the sheer scale of the underground complex. Vast caverns stretched out before them, illuminated by a soft, ambient light that seemed to emanate from the very walls. A diverse group of Zarantines approached, their scales displaying a variety of vibrant hues and patterns. Louis noticed that many of the females exhibited physical changes similar to Kira's, but more pronounced. Their eyes gleamed with an otherworldly intelligence, and their movements were fluid and graceful. As they disembarked, Kira instinctively moved closer to Louis, her scales rippling with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Dr. Zira, barely containing her excitement, immediately began scanning their surroundings with a handheld device. "Fascinating," she murmured, her scales flickering rapidly. "The energy readings here are off the charts." Elder Zix led them through winding corridors, deeper into the heart of the colony. Louis marveled at the seamless blend of organic architecture and advanced technology. The walls pulsed with life, responding to the presence of the colonists as they passed. They emerged into a vast central chamber that took Louis's breath away. At its center stood a colossal device, similar to the one they had encountered in the ruins, but on a much grander scale. It thrummed with power, sending pulses of energy rippling through the air. "This," Elder Zix said, gesturing towards the device, "is the genetic activation array. It was created by our ancestors to ensure that one day humans and Zarantines would reunite." Louis stepped closer, drawn by an inexplicable pull. "What does it do, exactly?" Elder Zix's eyes gleamed. "It unlocks the dormant potential within Zarantine DNA when exposed to human presence. And now, with your arrival, we can finally activate it fully." A murmur of excitement ran through the gathered colonists. Kira turned to Louis, her scales shimmering with a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. "Louis," she said softly, "I think we're meant to do this together." Elder Zix nodded. "Indeed, the ceremony requires prolonged physical contact between a human and a Zarantine while interfacing with the array." As Louis and Kira prepared for the ceremony, tensions began to rise within the group. Dr. Zira insisted on monitoring the process closely, setting up a series of sensors around the array. "We must document every aspect of this," she argued, her scales pulsing with scientific fervor. The implications could be staggering. Some of the colony members expressed concern. "Are we certain this is wise?" one asked, his scales darkening with worry. "We don't know what fully awakening our abilities might mean." Elder Zix raised a hand, her calm presence soothing the unrest. "This is our destiny, the purpose for which we have prepared for generations. We must trust in the wisdom of our ancestors." With a deep breath, Louis took Kira's hand, and they approached the array together. As they made contact with the device, a surge of energy coursed through them. Louis gasped, feeling as if every cell in his body was coming alive. Kira's transformation was breathtaking. Her scales shifted through a kaleidoscope of colors before settling into a brilliant, iridescent pattern that seemed to capture and reflect every hue in the spectrum. Around them, other Zarantine females in the colony underwent similar changes, each unique and mesmerizing. The energy from the array pulsed outward, growing stronger with each wave. Louis could feel it spreading beyond the confines of the colony, reaching out into space. Kira's grip on his hand tightened as the power flowing through them intensified. Suddenly, alarms began to blare throughout the complex. A young Zarantine technician rushed into the chamber, his scales flashing with urgency. "Elder Zix," he called out, "we're receiving reports from the homeworld. Zarantine females across the planet are experiencing sudden physiological changes." The chamber erupted into a flurry of activity. Dr. Zira frantically analyzed the incoming data, her scales flickering so rapidly they appeared to blur. It's spreading exponentially, she reported, her voice a mix of awe and concern. The entire Zarantine population is being affected. As the ceremony reached its peak, Louis felt a profound connection with Kira, deeper than anything he had ever experienced. When they finally separated from the array, both stumbled, overwhelmed by the intensity of the experience. Kira looked at her hands in wonder, her new iridescent scales shimmering with an inner light. "I feel different," she said, her voice filled with awe. "Everything is so clear, so vibrant." Louis watched in amazement as Kira effortlessly lifted a nearby piece of equipment that would have previously required several Zarantines to move. Her movements were more graceful, her reflexes lightning fast. "Your cognitive functions have increased dramatically," Dr. Zira observed, running a scanner over Kira. "And your physical capabilities? They're off the charts." As the initial shock of the transformation began to wear off, Elder Zix approached Louis and Kira, her expression grave. "The activation of the array has sent a signal into deep space," she explained. "It's possible that other ancient allies of our peoples may have been alerted to our reunion." Before Louis could process this new information, an urgent transmission cut through the air. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the stern face of General Thrix. "Ambassador Bryant," the general's voice boomed, his scales dark with fury. "I demand the immediate surrender of you, Kira, and the colonial leadership. These genetic changes pose an existential threat to our society. If you do not comply, we will have no choice but to take military action against the colony." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Louis looked at Kira, then at Elder Zix and Dr. Zira. The weight of their situation pressed down on him, the fate of two species hanging in the balance. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elder Zix's eyes gleamed with tenacity. "Now, we prepare. The true test of our people's reunion is about to begin." As the colony burst into frantic activity, Louis realized that the adventure he had stumbled into was far from finished. With Kira by his side and newfound allies surrounding them, they would have to navigate the perilous waters of interspecies, politics, military threats, and the unknown consequences of their actions. The future of human Zarantine relations hung in the balance, and Louis found himself at the very center of a cosmic drama that was only just beginning to unfold. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Louis's shoulders as he looked around at the faces of those gathered in the chamber. Elder Zix wasted no time in organizing an emergency meeting of the colony leadership. Louis, Kira, and Dr. Zira found themselves ushered into a sleek conference room, its walls adorned with holographic displays showing real-time data from across the galaxy. As they took their seats around a large oval table, Louis couldn't help but notice the tension in the room. The Zarantine leaders' scales flickered with a mixture of concern and excitement, their newly enhanced abilities clearly both a source of wonder and anxiety. "We need to respond to General Thrix's ultimatum," Elder Zix began, her voice calm but resolute. "Our actions here have set in motion events that will reshape both our societies. We cannot afford to be reactive." Dr. Zira nodded vigorously, her scales pulsing with scientific fervor. "Agreed. We must present our findings to the Zarantine government. The genetic changes we've observed are not a threat, but an awakening of our species' true potential." Louis leaned forward, his mind racing. What if we sent a diplomatic envoy to the homeworld? We could try to negotiate a peaceful resolution and share the truth about our ancient alliance. Kira's eyes lit up at the suggestion. "That could work, but who would go? The risk is significant." A moment of silence fell over the room as the implications of such a mission sank in. Louis took a deep breath, knowing what he had to do. "I'll go," he said, his voice firm. "My ability to influence Zarantine females could be crucial in swaying public opinion. We need to show that humans and Zarantines can work together." Kira's scales shimmered with a mix of admiration and concern. "Then I'm coming with you. You'll need protection, and I can demonstrate the positive effects of our bond firsthand." Dr. Zira's tail twitched with excitement. "I must join as well. My scientific expertise will be invaluable in explaining the genetic changes to our people. Elder Zix nodded approvingly. Very well. I will remain here to coordinate our efforts from the colony. We must move quickly before General Thrix can mobilize his forces. As the team began to prepare for their departure, an urgent alert sounded from one of the communication consoles. A young Zarantine technician rushed to answer it, his scales paling as he listened to the incoming transmission. Ambassador Bryant, he called out, his voice trembling. We're receiving a signal from Earth. They're demanding an explanation for the energy readings and reports of Zarantine physiological changes. Louis felt his stomach drop. The situation had just become infinitely more complicated. He exchanged a look with Kira, seeing his own concern mirrored in her iridescent eyes. We need to modify our plans, Louis said, addressing the room. We'll make a stop on Earth first to brief the human leaders before proceeding to the Zarantine homeworld. It's risky, but we can't afford to have Earth misunderstand what's happening. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity as the team prepared for their expanded mission. Louis found himself poring over diplomatic protocols and brushing up on his knowledge of Earth's political landscape. Kira worked with Dr. Zira to compile a comprehensive report on the genetic changes, while colony technicians outfitted their ship with the latest in stealth and communication technology. As they made final preparations to board their ship, Louis pulled Kira aside. In the relative privacy of a small alcove, he took her hands in his, marveling at the way her scales shimmered in response to his touch. Are you ready for this? He asked softly. Once we leave, there's no turning back. Kira's eyes met his, filled with dedication and something deeper, more primal. I'm ready, Louis. Whatever happens, we face it together. Their moment was interrupted by Dr. Zira's excited voice calling from the ship's entrance. Come on, you two. We have a galaxy to save. With a shared smile, Louis and Kira boarded the ship. As the engines hummed to life, Louis settled into his seat, acutely aware of Kira's presence beside him. The ship rose smoothly from the hangar, accelerating rapidly as it broke free of the moon's atmosphere. As they set course for Earth, Louis watched the stars streak by, each one a silent witness to the monumental journey they were undertaking. He knew that the fate of two species now rested in their hands, and the challenges ahead would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. The ship's communication system crackled to life, breaking Louis from his reverie. Incoming transmission from Earth, the ship's AI announced. They're requesting immediate visual contact. Louis straightened in his seat, exchanging a nervous glance with Kira. This was it, the moment that would set the tone for their entire mission. With a deep breath, he nodded to Dr. Zira, who activated the holographic display. The stern face of the United Earth Council's president materialized before them, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of Kira's transformed appearance. Ambassador Bryant, the president began, her voice tight with barely held back tension. You have some explaining to do. To do, the president finished, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene before her. Louis straightened his shoulders, acutely aware of the weight of the moment. Madam President, I understand your concerns. We're en route to Earth now to brief you in person on the situation. It's far more complex than it appears. The president's expression remained skeptical, but she nodded. Very well, Ambassador. We'll expect you within the hour. Earth out. As the transmission cut off, Louis exhaled slowly, turning to his companions. Well, that could have gone worse. Kira placed a reassuring hand on his arm, her iridescent scales shimmering. We'll make them understand, Louis. We have to. Dr. Zira's tail twitched anxiously as she pored over her datapad. I've compiled all our findings. If we can just get them to listen to reason. The ship's AI interrupted, its voice calm but urgent. Incoming transmission from Zarantine space. It's General Thrix. Louis' stomach clenched. Put him through. General Thrix's face materialized, his scales dark with almost unchecked fury. Ambassador Bryant, this is your final warning. Surrender immediately or face the consequences. Before Louis could respond, the ship lurched violently. Alarms blared as the AI announced, Multiple Zarantine vessels detected. They're blocking our path to Earth. Louis gripped his seat, mind racing. Evasive maneuvers. We need to... His words were cut short as a blinding light engulfed the ship. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then just as suddenly, the light vanished, leaving them in eerie silence. "Status report," Louis called out, blinking away the afterimage. The AI's voice crackled with static. "All systems temporarily offline. Zarantine fleet appears similarly affected." As the ship's systems slowly came back online, a new transmission cut through the silence. A Zarantine face Louis didn't recognize appeared on screen, her scales a brilliant, pulsing array of colors. "This is Lyra of the Zarantine Resistance," she announced, her voice filled with urgency. "Ambassador Bryant, we need your help. The ancient installation on our homeworld has activated. Our entire civilization is in chaos." Louis exchanged glances with Kira and Dr. Zira. The weight of their new mission settled upon them, Earth momentarily forgotten. "Plot a course for the Zarantine homeworld," Louis ordered, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his gut. "Maximum speed." As they approached Zarantine space, the true scale of the situation became apparent. The planet below was a swirling mass of energy patterns, visible even from orbit. Ships of all sizes drifted aimlessly, their systems still recovering from the massive surge. "We're being hailed," the AI announced. "It's General Thrix." The general's face appeared, his usual composure shattered. "Bryant, what have you done? Our world is in chaos. Thousands of females are changing. We're losing control." Louis leaned forward, his voice firm. "General, we didn't cause this, but we might be able to help. Let us land and we'll explain everything." Thrix's scales flickered with indecision before he finally nodded. "Very well, but you'll be under heavy guard." As they descended through the atmosphere, the true extent of the transformation became clear. The cities below were alive with pulsing energy, and everywhere they looked, Zarantine females displayed new, vibrant scale patterns and enhanced physical abilities. They landed in a heavily guarded spaceport, the air thick with tension. As Louis, Kira, and Dr. Zira disembarked, they were met by a squad of Zarantine soldiers, led by a grim-faced General Thrix. "This way," Thrix growled, leading them towards a massive structure, pulsing with energy. "The ancient installation activated without warning. We've lost all control." As they approached the building, a group of transformed Zarantine females suddenly materialized before them, led by the one who had contacted them earlier. "Ambassador Bryant," Lyra called out, her scales shimmering with barely held back power. "We've been waiting for you. The time has come for our people to embrace their true potential." General Thrix's scales darkened with rage. "Traitors! You'll doom us all!" Before anyone could react, Thrix lunged towards the ancient installation's entrance. "I'll put an end to this madness myself." Louis and Kira exchanged a quick glance before sprinting after him, their enhanced physiology allowing them to overtake the general just as he reached the control center. Inside, they found themselves surrounded by swirling energy and pulsing light. At the center stood a device eerily similar to the one they had activated in the hidden colony. Thrix reached for the controls, but Louis grabbed his arm. "Wait! You don't know what you're doing!" Suddenly, the device emitted a high-pitched whine. Dr. Zira, who had just entered the room, gasped in horror. "It's overloading! If we don't stabilize it, the energy release could devastate the entire planet." Louis turned to Kira, his heart racing. "We have to try to interface with it, like we did before. It's our only chance." Kira nodded, her eyes filled with dedication. Together, then. As they approached the pulsing core of the device, Louis could feel the energy crackling around them. He took Kira's hand, marveling at how natural it felt despite the chaos surrounding them. "Whatever happens," he said softly, "I'm glad we're facing it together." With that, they pressed their hands against the ancient controls, and the world around them exploded into light and sensation. Louis felt Kira's hand tighten around his as their consciousness merged with the ancient device. The energy surrounding them intensified, crackling with power and purpose. Their intertwined bodies were enveloped in a cocoon of pulsating light, the physical world around them fading into a swirling vortex of color and sound. Outside the installation, the battling factions froze in mid-conflict, their attention drawn to the sky above. The atmosphere erupted into a dazzling display of colors, ribbons of light dancing across the horizon in a mesmerizing pattern. Within the control center, Louis and Kira's combined efforts to reprogram the device reached a crescendo. Their minds worked in perfect harmony, decoding and rewriting the ancient programming with an instinctive understanding that transcended their individual knowledge. Suddenly, a massive shockwave of energy burst forth from the installation. It swept across the planet's surface like a tidal wave of light, washing over the Zarantine population. As it passed, individuals experienced a momentary sensation of warmth and clarity, their bodies tingling with newfound energy. General Thrix, who had been struggling against Louis and Kira's efforts, stumbled backwards as the wave hit him. His scales rippled with an iridescent sheen, and he gasped as a surge of sensation coursed through his body. Dr. Zira, watching from the entrance of the control room, called out in amazement, "The genetic changes are stabilizing! Look at the energy patterns!" Indeed, those who had already begun to transform found their abilities settling into a controlled, manageable state. Others who had yet to experience any changes felt a gradual awakening of enhanced senses and abilities. Within the energy cocoon, Louis and Kira's physical forms began to shift and merge. Their bodies glowed with an otherworldly light as the reprogramming reached its final stages. Louis felt his skin tingle and stretch, while Kira experienced a strange sensation of her scales softening and reshaping. In a blinding flash that forced Dr. Zira to shield her eyes, the energy cocoon dissipated. As the light faded, Louis and Kira stood hand in hand, their appearances subtly altered. Louis now sported iridescent patterns on his skin that shifted and shimmered like Zarantine scales. Kira's features had taken on some human characteristics, her face more expressive and her body shape slightly altered. They looked at each other in wonder, marveling at the changes. Louis reached out to touch Kira's face, his fingers tracing the new contours of her cheekbones. "Kira, you're beautiful," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. Kira's eyes, now a striking blend of human and Zarantine features, sparkled with emotion. "As are you, Louis. We've become something more." Their moment of intimacy was interrupted by a commotion outside. Together, they made their way to the entrance of the installation, their movements in perfect sync. As they emerged into the open air, the fighting came to an abrupt halt. Zarantine soldiers and resistance members alike stared in amazement at the transformed couple. General Thrix, witnessing the change in his own troops and feeling the new sensations coursing through his body, realized the futility of his resistance. With a heavy sigh, Thrix approached Louis and Kira. I surrender," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I see now that this change cannot be stopped, and perhaps it shouldn't be." Lyra and her followers pushed through the crowd, their faces beaming with joy and reverence. "Ambassador Bryant, Kira," Lyra called out, her scales pulsing with vibrant colors. "You've done it. You've saved us all." The atmosphere of tension and conflict that had permeated the area just moments ago now gave way to one of peace and wonder. Zarantines from both sides of the conflict began to mingle, examining their new abilities and sharing their experiences. Dr. Zira approached Louis and Kira, her tail twitching with excitement. "The genetic changes have been successfully stabilized across the population," she reported, consulting her datapad. "Individuals are exhibiting varying degrees of enhanced abilities based on their unique genetic makeup. It's fascinating." Louis nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. "And the device? Is it safe now?" "Yes," Dr. Zira confirmed. "The reprogramming was successful. It's no longer a threat to the planet or its inhabitants." As the news of their success spread, a new era of cooperation between humans and Zarantines began to dawn. The Zarantine High Council, recognizing the need for change in light of recent events, announced their intention to step down in favor of a new, more representative government. In the days that followed, Louis and Kira found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of activity. They worked tirelessly with both human and Zarantine officials to establish new protocols for interaction between the two species. The ancient installation was converted into a research center, where scientists from both worlds collaborated to unlock the secrets of their shared history and explore the full potential of their newfound abilities. One evening, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the Zarantine capital, Louis and Kira took a moment to reflect on all that had transpired. The city below was a harmonious blend of traditional Zarantine architecture and new bioadaptive structures that seemed to pulse with life. "It's incredible, isn't it?" Louis mused, his gaze sweeping over the transformed landscape. "Just a few weeks ago, we were on the brink of war, and now—" Kira leaned into him, her newly altered form fitting perfectly against his side. "Now we stand at the beginning of a new chapter for both our peoples." As they watched, a group of human settlers was being welcomed into a Zarantine neighborhood, the two species interacting with a newfound ease and understanding. The once feared effect of human eye contact on Zarantines had been transformed into a catalyst for positive change, strengthening the bond between the two species. Louis turned to Kira, taking in her unique beauty, a perfect blend of human and Zarantine traits. As their eyes met, he felt the familiar spark of attraction, but it was now tempered with a deep, cosmic understanding of their place in the universe. "What's next for us?" he asked softly, reaching out to intertwine his fingers with hers. Kira's scales shimmered with a mix of excitement and tenderness. "I think we have a lot of work ahead of us, Louis. There's so much more to explore, so many more bridges to build between our peoples." Louis nodded, a smile playing on his lips. "Together?" "Always," Kira replied, leaning in to kiss him gently. As their lips met, a soft pulse of energy rippled through them, a reminder of the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. They both knew that this was just the beginning, a new chapter in a story that would span galaxies and generations. The sun began to set on the Zarantine capital, casting a warm glow over the city. Louis and Kira stood together, their silhouettes merging into one as they looked out towards the horizon, ready to face whatever challenges and adventures lay ahead.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.